I just bought this 68 Super Reverb, black line silver face, and inside of it was this invoice for repairs that were apparently just completed in April of 22. I was a bit shocked. I'm not sure I'd put $715 in a 68 Super Reverb. To me, that's more than half its value. But then when I started looking, I see that there's a power supply cap kit, a 3-prong power cable, 2 preamp tubes, a reverb tank, labor, and a poly cap preamp kit, an electrolytic cap preamp kit. All kind of ringing bells with me. I was glad to see that the parts were returned to the customer when he paid. But my God, I'm just shocked at $715. Now you have to bear in mind that a $715 repair did not include any transformers, didn't include any power tubes, apparently didn't include the bias cap either. When you're doing a cap job, that needs to go. And having replaced all the blue original Mallories that came in these amps, it's kind of a shocker to me. I almost never have to replace them. So I'm going to go about putting the blue ones back in. And also want to remind you too that there were no speakers involved in this rehab. I'm just still shocked. Looks like some work that may not have been required on one hand, but on the other hand, even if it was, $715. Now, part of a normal rehab for me is to change the grid resistors. So let's check them, because they weren't changed in this job. Here's the 470 ohm that are measuring 625 on this tube. The 1.5Ks are measuring 2.5. On the other power tube, the 470 ohm is 570 plus, and the 1.5K is 2.5K. Normal rehab, those would have been changed. So it was easy to see they were original to the amp and well worth testing to spec. And then just kind of cruising around in here a little bit, I see the joint on this one where the lead on this cap was tied to an existing lead? Or maybe that's just some spilled solder. Who knows? We'll find out. Anyway, looking around, then I also see a little stray wire in there. That's interesting. You don't hope to find those things in a fully rehabbed amp. Anyhow, well, I'm going to keep checking. So we'll start checking some of these blue ones before we replace them, and you can see that this 0.1 cap measures 0.106. Let's try a few more here. 0.101. 0.104. Oop, fell off there. That's pretty darn close to 0.1. Let's see what else we've got. Another one. Right on spec. And we've got an 047 right here. And it's an 05. Here's an 02. Right on 02. And another 02. Right on. Now maybe the darn things leak. We'll find out, because they're all going back in. So checking around in here some more, we find plate resistors at 115. You know, they're supposed to be 100K, so they're right on the outside tolerance. But I thought it'd be interesting, for example, this 100K right here in the phase inverter section, that 100K is 144, way out of spec. Then we got our two bias resistors that are supposed to be 5% spec or less, 220Ks, they're 250s. 242, 250, you know, both of these should be closely matched and 5% or less, around 220, certainly not over 230. Anyway, and this one's way off. These should have been changed. Alright, so we've got the grid resistors replaced in the power tubes, and we've got the phase inverter section rebuilt with proper spec caps and the original blue Mallory's put back in. And now as we go back down here, we're going to replace some of these plate resistors that are way out of spec. And I like to solder these twisted cathode bypass caps. When you just twist them together, then run some solder over it. It's just a better deal. Hoping you can see this, although there really isn't much to see. Just a couple of strands of wire coming from the reverb transformer. The other guy should have caught that, stripped it, and then reattached it properly. Alright, here we've got a 220K resistor that measures 280. Figured that should come out also. Replacing that old bias cap in there with a fresh one. The 470 ohm resistor that was in there measured 560. We replaced that too. All done with that. So there we go. We've got all the original blue caps back in. We've replaced some plate resistors that were out of spec and any other resistor that we found. We replaced all the grid resistors, and we fixed up the bias cap. Now I think we ought to bias these power tubes and see where we're at. Here we're using the transformer shunt method to check the bias of these power tubes directly out of the shop. It's sitting at 21. Usually a 6L6 needs to run about 32. So we got 21.8 milliamps on one tube, and we're getting 24.6 on the other tube. So that's close enough for matching, but that's as high as we can get the bias turned up. So we're going to have to change the resistor on the adjustment pot to get more range. So we took that stock 27K out of there and put in a 10K. And now we were able to get it up easily to 32 milliamps, right where we'd like it to be. Unfortunately, I have to point out that the previous tech apparently didn't attempt to bias the amp. So now we're going to clean these dirty connections on the foot switch and the reverb pan, and then we're going to check that reverb pan because a new one was installed. Can you tell the difference? Yeah, me too. I know there's nothing in the tech book about cleaning things up, but I cleaned this knob. Look at it compared to the other ones. So as long as I'm here, I might as well do it. Nothing against the previous tech, because they don't normally pay us for cleaning up. Well, here we go. We've got it fired back up with all the original caps back in, and several replaced out of spec resistors, a rebuilt bias section, grid stoppers, and all of that. And Everything seems to be just fine. So all of this took us a little more than an hour, hour and a half, let's say, to get everything correct. Which, I'll tally up the costs and let you know when we get the chassis back in. Well, here it is. We took all the caps he'd put in out, put the blues back in. Here's all the out-of-spec resistors that we found, and there's the old bias cap that we replaced. Well, we've replaced a dozen out-of-spec resistors. We replaced all the yellow caps they'd put in on the board with all the original blue Mallories. And we replaced the bias cap, the bias resistor, the grid resistors. And it's not substantially different than what it was after it was fixed, but at least we know it's fixed. So you need to decide, was $715 well spent? I think not. Vastly overcharged and vastly under-repaired. But you decide. And watch your techs when you're taking amps in. Make sure you know who you're dealing with.